They didn't fight with sticks and stones. They fought with science. History books demand that you believe a comfortable, sanitized lie. They tell you human progress is a slow, predictable straight line, that our ancestors crawled out of caves, banged heavy bronze swords together, and patiently waited thousands of years for the Industrial Revolution to save them. But the physical evidence left bleeding into the soil of ancient battlefields tells a completely different, terrifying story. What if I told you that long before the invention of the microchip or the modern combustion engine, ancient military engineers were actively deploying weapons of mass destruction? We are looking at surviving physical artifacts that prove the undeniable existence of advanced thrust-vectoring, nanometer-thick cutting edges, and directed thermal energy capable of vaporizing entire fleets. Mainstream academics and traditional historians absolutely refuse to acknowledge this. They look at impossible molecular-level metallurgy and dismiss it as a lucky campfire. They look at analog targeting gears that shouldn't exist and write them off as astrological toys. They do this because acknowledging the truth completely collapses the accepted timeline of human civilization. If we admit our ancestors mastered this level of advanced physics, we have to face the dark reality that they were capable of triggering a localized apocalypse, and that we are simply the survivors living in the ashes. The heat signatures don't match. The gears shouldn't exist. And the deadliest inventions were deliberately erased from the timeline to keep you in the dark. The first lie begins with a weapon that rewrites the mechanical limits of war. Let's get to it. Story 10, the Chuko Nu. Imagine you are a hardened foot soldier in the 4th century BC, standing on the blood-soaked plains of ancient China, bracing for an enemy charge, confident in the thick plates of your heavy bronze armor. You know the brutal, predictable rhythm of ancient warfare. You know that traditional archers require agonizing seconds to nock, draw, aim, and fire a single arrow. In that brief reload window, you survive. You calculate the timing, raise your shield, and wait for the volley to pass. But suddenly, the rhythm of war violently breaks. The air fills with a blinding, relentless swarm of steel-tipped bolts. The sky goes dark, not from a single organized volley, but from a continuous, unbroken stream of kinetic fire that shreds through your front lines with the terrifying, mechanized cadence of a modern rotary cannon. You've just been hit by the Chuko Nu, the world's first repeating crossbow. But the sheer existence of this weapon in antiquity is a mechanical nightmare that completely shatters the official historical timeline. The Chuko Nu wasn't just a bow. It was a highly complex, gravity-fed magazine system integrated with precise dual-action lever. With a single fluid motion of the operator's arm, the internal machinery dropped a bolt into the firing groove, drew the heavy bowstring to maximum tension, and fired it. It could unleash 10 shots in under 15 seconds. Mainstream historians and traditional academics desperately try to downplay this anomaly. Open a textbook, and they will tell you the Chuko Nu was just a clunky, weak toy made of bamboo, utilized mostly to scare unarmored peasants with poisoned darts. They categorize it as a primitive novelty to keep the linear narrative intact. But modern mechanical engineers who have analyzed the surviving schematics will quickly tell you a deeply unsettling truth. The sheer kinetic stress of a rapid-fire torsion cycle on a wooden chassis is immense. To make this weapon function reliably on a chaotic battlefield without instantly snapping or jamming requires an advanced understanding of mechanical stress distribution and perfectly milled moving parts. Most importantly, it demands perfectly standardized, interchangeable ammunition. If a single bolt in the magazine is off by even 1 millimeter in diameter, the entire internal feed jams, rendering the weapon useless. The ancient Chinese hadn't just built a clever bow, they had mastered analog mass production and standardized industrial-era tolerances. Yet, this genius was systematically minimized. The intellectual loss to humanity is staggering. By classifying this weapon as a primitive toy, historians quietly erase the proof of a highly industrialized ancient society, burying the reality of their manufacturing power for over 2,000 years. But while engineering analog machinery on land is one thing, conquering the unforgiving laws of oceanic physics is another entirely. If you think a 2,000-year-old machine gun is a glitch in the Matrix, wait until you see the physics-defying nightmare of the Roman Empire deployed on the open water at number 9. Story 9, the Roman Corvus. Imagine the year is 260 BC. You are a sailor drafted into the First Punic War, staring out across the unforgiving swells of the Mediterranean. The Roman Republic is an absolute juggernaut on land, but on the open ocean, you are getting systematically slaughtered. The Carthaginians possess the most advanced, maneuverable naval fleet on the planet. Their ships slice through the water, effortlessly outflanking and ramming your heavy, clumsy vessels. Defeat seems mathematically certain. Rome is desperate, bleeding out money and men into the sea. But suddenly, the Roman military hierarchy rolls out a fleet equipped with something utterly alien. Mounted to the prow of your ship is a towering, terrifying piece of machinery called the Corvus, the Raven. It is a massive 36-foot-long, 4-foot-wide rotating boarding bridge, topped with a brutal, heavy iron spike. When an agile Carthaginian ship gets too close, the release mechanism is triggered. The colossal bridge drops, the iron spike smashes straight through the enemy deck, and the two ships are locked in an inescapable death grip. The Romans instantly turn a fluid naval battle into a brutal infantry slaughter, completely annihilating the Carthaginian Empire. Here is the massive, glaring anomaly that marine architects scream about when they analyze this weapon. Mainstream historians casually write in their textbooks that the Romans just lazily bolted a wooden ramp to the front of their ships and sailed off to victory. They dismiss it as a crude, desperate Hail Mary. But naval physicists have run the buoyancy and fluid dynamics models, and the math absolutely forbids the official story. If you mount a multi-ton rotating timber mast on the front of a narrow, lightweight, shallow-draft Roman quinquereme, it creates a catastrophic center of gravity. The sheer torsional force of violently dropping that massive bridge onto another moving vessel in the middle of unpredictable, rolling ocean swells would either instantly capsize the Roman ship or physically rip the entire prow off the hull. To make the Corvus function without committing fleet-wide mass suicide, the Romans had to utilize a highly advanced, dynamic gyroscopic counterweighting system deep within the hull. They possess a suppressed understanding of naval engineering, rotational inertia, and dynamic ballast physics that completely contradicts the narrative of them being primitive landlubbers. And then, the institutional suppression kicked in. Just a few decades after its terrifying debut, the Corvus mysteriously and completely vanished from all Roman naval records. Mainstream academics claim a few storms destroyed some fleets, so the Romans supposedly just threw the technology away. But military logic dictates you do not permanently abandon an empire-building superweapon because of bad weather. The records were intentionally scrubbed. The technology was classified and buried, taking the thousands of sailors who operated it to a silent, watery grave, ensuring precise engineering secrets could never be reverse-engineered by rival empires. Manipulating gravity and buoyancy on the open ocean is a terrifying leap in classical physics. But while Rome conquered the water, another civilization was busy mastering catastrophic thermal thrust in the sky. Wait until you see the apocalyptic weapon waiting at number 8. Story 8, the Wacha. Imagine standing on the cold stone ramparts of a Korean fortress in the year 1592, during the brutal Imjin War. A massive invasion force of highly trained, heavily armored samurai is marching steadily toward your gates. They outnumber your defending garrison 10-1. Defeat isn't just a grim possibility. It seems mathematically certain. You wait for your commanders to deploy traditional archers, bracing your body for a desperate, bloody, hand-to-hand slaughter. But the predictable rhythm of ancient warfare is about to be violently shattered. Your commanders do not call for bows. Instead, they roll out rows of strange, two-wheel wooden carts. Atop each cart sits a honeycomb-like grid, containing exactly 200 wooden tubes. A single soldier walks down the line, lighting a central, synchronized fuse. In a fraction of a second, the battlefield erupts into an apocalyptic roar. 200 explosive-tipped arrows launch simultaneously in a highly controlled, devastating arc. They scream through the air, completely obliterating the samurai front lines in a massive, coordinated explosive barrage. You are witnessing the devastating kinetic power of the Hwacha, a 15th century multiple rocket launcher. If you open a mainstream history book, traditional academics will quickly reduce this terrifying machine to a mere footnote. They arrogantly dismiss the Hwacha as glorified fireworks strapped to arrows, heavily imply it was just a crude, chaotic party trick used to scare horses and uneducated soldiers. They want you to believe it was a primitive anomaly. But aerospace engineers and ballistics experts look at the surviving schematics and see a thermodynamic miracle that completely defies the 15th century timeline. To launch 200 projectiles simultaneously, without them violently colliding in midair, destroying the wooden launch vehicle, or fizzling out on the pad, you absolutely cannot use basic, unstable, hand-mixed black powder. You need a perfectly standardized, highly compressed chemical propellant. The ancient Korean engineers had to guarantee identical thrust vectoring and synchronized burn rates across 200 separate, miniaturized combustion chambers. Furthermore, the wooden launch grid had to be engineered to withstand an instantaneous, massive thermal shock and immense simultaneous recoil without splintering into deadly shrapnel. The Koreans in the 1400s had effectively mastered the exact same thrust-to-weight ratios, recoil dampening, and stage ignition sequences used in modern MLRS, multiple launch rocket systems. This wasn't a festive fireworks display. This was a mobile grid of calculated ballistic missiles. The state knew exactly how dangerous this technological leap was. The official historical narrative tries to tell us the Hwacha was just naturally phase out over time. The truth is much darker. The master engineers capable of mixing these precise chemical propellants and calculating the thrust vectors were considered walking classified weapons. They were heavily guarded, entirely isolated from the public, and highly targeted by rival assassins. When the knowledge became too dangerous to proliferate, the mass production of these analog MLRS systems was quietly throttled, and the true extent of their ballistic formulas was suppressed to prevent them from falling into enemy hands. But rockets leave explosive, fiery debris. They are loud, chaotic, and leave a massive footprint. What about a weapon that operates in total silence? If mastering chemical rocket thrusts in the 1400s shatters your perception of the past, wait until you see the terrifying weapon at number 7, an ancient artifact engineered to slice at the exact molecular level. Story 7, the Macula Weedle. Imagine it is the year 1519. You are a Spanish conquistador marching deep into the heart of the Aztec Empire, entering the sprawling, highly advanced metropolis of Tenochtitlan. You are draped in heavy, supposedly impenetrable Toledo steel armor, carrying weapons forged in the finest metallurgical furnaces of Europe. As you form your battle lines, you look at the indigenous warriors standing before you. They are wearing quilted cotton armor and holding what appears to be primitive, flat wooden cricket bats. You laugh. Wrapped in the arrogance of European technological superiority, you assume this will be a one-sided, effortless slaughter. But then, the brutal reality of Aztec engineering violently shatters your worldview. An Aztec eagle warrior swings that wooden bat at your heavily armored cavalry mount. In a single, fluid, devastating strike, the weapon does not bludgeon or crush. It shears clean through the horse's neck, instantly decapitating the massive beast and slicing effortlessly right through the steel chainmail protecting it. You have just witnessed the catastrophic kinetic power of the Macula Weedle. Embedded along the edges of this heavy oak chassis were perfectly spaced, razor-sharp prismatic blades of obsidian. If you read standard European historical accounts, the conquistadors and subsequent mainstream academics completely downplayed this terrifying weapon. Textbooks dismissively describe a Macula Weedle as a Stone Age club, heavily implying it was a crude, primitive tool made by people who simply banged rocks together until they got a jagged edge. But modern material scientists and high-resolution electron microscopes reveal a terrifying, suppressed truth. When volcanic obsidian is fractured correctly, the cutting edge tapers down to a single molecule in thickness, roughly 3 nanometers wide. To put that physical impossibility into perspective, the sharpest surgical steel scalpel used in a modern United States operating room is 300 to 3,000 times duller than a properly flaked Aztec obsidian blade. Here's a mechanical nightmare that traditional historians absolutely refuse to acknowledge. You cannot achieve uniform, perfectly straight, interlocking molecular blades by randomly chipping at volcanic glass. The Aztec weaponsmiths were utilizing highly advanced, mathematically controlled pressure-flaking algorithms. They possess an intimate understanding of the crystalline fracture mechanics of silicon dioxide. They were intentionally manufacturing a macro weapon equipped with a microscopic nanotechnology edge. When swung with the heavy leverage of the oak base, the molecular edge didn't just cut. It passed perfectly between the cellular structures of bone and steel, separating solid matter with practically zero friction. The Spanish military hierarchy was absolutely terrified by this technology. When Tenochtitlan fell, the conquistadors didn't just loot the gold. They systematically targeted and burned the indigenous codices, intentionally destroying the metallurgical and crafting records of Mesoamerica. They erased the proof of Aztec nanotechnology from the face of the earth, reclassifying their highly advanced materials science as savage rock-banging to permanently bury the truth. But while the Aztec Empire mastered molecular cutting edges in the jungles of Mexico, a classical civilization was busy bending the laws of fluid dynamics to their breaking point. If nanotechnology in 1519 shatters your historical timeline, wait until you see the terrifying hydraulic nightmare deployed against the Roman Navy at number 6. Story 6. The Claw of Archimedes. Imagine the year is 214 BC. You are a Roman marine standing on the deck of a massive quinquereme, a colossal warship weighing upwards of 200 tons. Your fleet is laying siege to the supposedly impenetrable city of Syracuse, creeping toward the colossal sea walls under the cover of pitch-black darkness. The Roman Republic is confident. On the open water, your heavy armor and massive ships make you feel utterly invincible. You expect a volley of arrows or flaming pitch. Suddenly, the darkness is violently broken by the deafening sound of grinding, heavy bronze gears. A colossal iron grappling hook, attached to a massive wooden crane arm, drops from the cliffside walls above. It smashes violently into the prow of your warship and locks deep into the structural timber. Then, the machine does the impossible. It lifts the entire 200-ton Roman warship completely out of the Mediterranean Sea, suspending it high in midair, before violently releasing the tension. The ship drops, shattering the keel upon the water's surface, and sending the entire crew to the bottom of the ocean. This is a Claw of Archimedes. For centuries, classical academics and modern mainstream historians have desperately tried to laugh this weapon off as a complete myth. They arrogantly claim ancient writers were just exaggerating to build up the legend of Archimedes. They insist he just had some simple ropes and pulleys that maybe tipped the Roman boats a little bit. But mechanical engineers look at the raw kinetic requirements of lifting a 200-ton deadweight on a 50-foot fulcrum over a cliff face, and they break out in a cold sweat. You absolutely cannot achieve this with basic organic fiber ropes and human muscle. The cable tensile strength required to execute this maneuver exceeds any material officially known to the 3rd century BC. To make this terrifying machine function without instantly snapping the crane's timber arm or ripping the entire machine right off the masonry of the seawall, Archimedes had to be utilizing a massive seal hydraulic displacement system, or an immensely complex differential gear array to multiply kinetic force exponentially. Furthermore, The operator had to calculate the exact center of gravity of an enemy ship in the dark, account for the violent shifting of tons of internal water weight, and apply an instantaneous, catastrophic counter-torque. Archimedes didn't just build a crane. He weaponized the laws of kinetic multiplication to a degree the world wouldn't officially see again for another 2,000 years. The Romans were so utterly terrified by this technology that they refused to bring their ships anywhere near the walls, eventually taking the city only by a prolonged starvation blockade. The Roman general Marcellus gave strict, explicit orders to capture Archimedes alive. They needed his mind, but the moment the city gates fell, a Roman soldier executed the genius on the spot. Mainstream history calls this a tragic accident of war. But assassinating the only man who understood the mathematical algorithms required to build weapons of mass destruction isn't an accident. It's a targeted technological decapitation. The Romans didn't just kill Archimedes. They destroyed his blueprints, permanently erasing the structural secrets of the claw to ensure no rival empire could ever replicate it. But while the Greeks mastered macroengineering and massive kinetic force, another civilization was mastering physics on the microscopic scale. If lifting 200-ton warships out of the water shatters your perception of the classical era, wait until you see the actual nanotechnology forged into the swords of the Middle East at number 5. Story 5, Damascus Steel. The searing heat of the 12th century Levant beats down on a heavily armored European crusader. He steps forward, swinging a massive, blunt slab of European iron, a broadsword designed purely to bludgeon through chain mail and bone utilizing brute kinetic force. He strikes the blade of an elite warrior from Saladin's army, fully expecting the lighter, thinner Middle Eastern sword to violently shatter into pieces upon impact. Instead of a heavy metallic thud, the collision produces a sickening, high-pitched ring. The Islamic warrior's sword is impossibly light, its surface covered in a mesmerizing, watery, rippling pattern. With a single effortless flick of the wrist, the intricately patterned blade cuts completely through Crusader's solid iron sword. The edge doesn't roll. It doesn't chip. Seconds later, it slices a piece of silk floating in the desert wind perfectly in half, retaining a microscopic edge so sharp it practically defies the laws of friction. This is the legendary Damascus steel. For hundreds of years, European kings and modern mainstream historians dismissed the secret of these blades as a romanticized myth, or worse, just lucky blacksmiths swinging hammers at high-quality Indian woods or over dirty coal fires. They desperately want to frame medieval metallurgy as a primitive, trial-and-error guessing game. But in 2006, the official timeline of human technology was quietly, completely destroyed. A team of crystallographers from Dresden, Germany, placed a genuine 17th century Damascus blade under a high-resolution transmission electron microscope. What they discovered inside the steel sent shock waves through the scientific community. Enclosing the ultra-hard cementite wires of blade were perfectly formed carbon nanotubes. Carbon nanotubes are a pinnacle of 21st century nanotechnology. They are cylindrical carbon molecules that require highly controlled, modern laboratory environments to synthesize. In modern aerospace and military applications, they give materials superplasticity and an edge that essentially self-sharpens at the microscopic level. You absolutely cannot create carbon nanotubes by blindly hitting hot iron in a crude medieval forge. It requires a deliberate, extremely precise thermal manipulation held at exactly 1,500 degrees Fahrenheit. The ancient smiths were purposefully introducing specific trace elements like vanadium and molybdenum into the crucible to act as a chemical catalyst, forcing the carbon to align into a complex, microscopic crystalline grid. These ancient Middle Eastern metallurgists were not just blacksmiths. They were performing controlled, molecular-level carbon engineering. They were intentionally manipulating the atomic structure of iron centuries before modern science even proved the existence of the atom. But by the 18th century, this world-changing technology abruptly vanished. The trade routes for the specific catalyst ores were mysteriously severed, and the tightly guarded bloodlines of the master smiths were deliberately eradicated. The ultimate metallurgical secret was taken to the grave, effectively suppressing a massive leap in material science that could propel human engineering centuries forward. The erasure was absolute and devastating. But if molecular manipulation in the Middle Ages challenges your view of historical progression, wait until you see the fully automated, infinite-fire artillery the Greeks were hiding at number 4. Story 4, the Polybolos. The scorching sun beats down on the fortified walls of Rhodes in the 3rd century BC. A colossal wooden siege tower, packed with enemy soldiers, rumbles relentlessly toward the city gates. The defender's standard artillery, massive torsion ballistas, require a dedicated team of sweating men to desperately crank back the heavy animal sinew springs, load a massive armor-piercing bolt, fire, and repeat. It takes agonizing minutes between shots. The invading army knows the specific reload window is their golden ticket. They advance steadily, fully anticipating the inevitable lull in the bombardment. Suddenly, the predictable rhythm of the siege is violently interrupted. Up on the ramparts, a lone Greek soldier stands behind a massive wooden chassis. He isn't loading. He isn't pulling back a bowstring. He is simply turning a heavy bronze crank. With a rhythmic, terrifying clatter, the machine automatically drops a heavy iron-tipped bolt from a gravity-fed hopper, draws back the immense tension of the twisted springs, fires, and resets. The soldier doesn't stop turning. The Polybolos unleashes a continuous, devastating barrage of heavy artillery, completely shredding the approaching siege tower in a sustained hail of mechanized suppressing fire. Mainstream classical academics casually refer to the Polybolos as a neat Hellenistic gadget, treating it like a quirky one-off novelty project built by a bored engineer. They desperately want to keep it classified as a primitive catapult. But look closely at the internal mechanics, and the official timeline of human industrialization completely collapses. The Polybolos was driven by a continuous flat link chain, the exact same mechanical principle utilized in a modern bicycle chain, or the drive tread of a 20th century military tank. Mechanical engineers will tell you that creating a functioning flat link chain drive out of cast bronze is an absolute manufacturing nightmare. It requires strictly standardized, interchangeable parts and microscopic tolerances. The torque required to repeatedly draw back a heavy ballista bowstring would tear a primitive, hand-forged chain to shreds. If a single bronze link is warped or cast even 1 millimeter out of alignment, the entire chain instantly jams or violently snaps under the immense kinetic tension. You cannot build a Polybolos with just one smart inventor tinkering in a shed. You absolutely must possess a massive, industrialized manufacturing base capable of mass-producing perfectly identical, stress-tested machine parts over 2,000 years before Henry Ford's assembly line. The official history books claim the Industrial Revolution happened in the 1800s, but the precision gears of the Polybolos prove the Greeks were already there. Yet, this entire branch of mechanized warfare was systematically buried, its blueprints supposedly lost in the fires of ancient libraries, resetting human engineering back to the Dark Ages. The intellectual suppression was absolute, guaranteeing that no competing empire could mechanize their armies. But kinetic weapons, no matter how advanced or automated, only break wood and bone. What happens when an ancient empire weaponizes chemistry to burn the world instead? If mass-produced chain drives in antiquity shatter your reality, wait until you see the inextinguishable hypergolic liquid plasma of the Byzantine Empire at number 3. Story 3, Greek Fire. The year is 678 AD. The beating heart of the Byzantine Empire, Constantinople, is completely suffocated by a massive, seemingly invincible Arab naval armada. The horizon is choked with thousands of enemy warships, heavily armed and preparing for the final, crushing blow. The Byzantine capital is on the verge of total collapse, and conventional military strategy dictates that surrender is the only mathematical outcome. But as the invading fleet closes in for the kill, the Byzantine defenders do not loose volleys of arrows. They do not hurl boulders. Instead, the prows of their specialized warships open up, extending long, swiveling bronze siphons directly toward the enemy line. Suddenly, a pressurized, roaring stream of thick liquid erupts from the tubes. The moment this chemical hits the rolling ocean swells, it doesn't wash away. It violently, spontaneously ignites. It burns directly on top of the water. It burns underwater. When the terrified Arab sailors desperately pour seawater over their burning decks, the chemical reaction only burned hotter. The sticky, viscous liquid clings to the hulls of the ships and the flesh of the men, burning with such an intense, localized thermal output that it literally melts through heavy iron anchor chains in a matter of seconds. Within minutes, the Mediterranean Sea is transformed into an inextinguishable lake of fire. This is the legendary Greek fire. If you open a standard history textbook, traditional academics desperately try to explain away this apocalyptic weapon as a crude, simple mixture of pine resin, sulfur, and unrefined crude oil. They want you to believe that 7th century sailors simply stirred some sticky pitch in a wooden bucket and got lucky. But modern military chemists look at the historical battlefield reports and know that the official narrative is a complete, deliberate lie. Basic crude oil and pine resin do not spontaneously combust upon contact with water, and they absolutely do not burn hot enough to melt solid iron on the open ocean. To achieve a true hypergolic reaction, a chemical that instantly and violently combusts a second is exposed to moisture. You need highly unstable, synthesized compounds like calcium phosphide or a highly refined napalm-like gel. Furthermore, pumping a pressurized, highly volatile liquid plasma through a bronze tube without instantly detonating your own ship requires specialized positive displacement diaphragm pumps, airtight brass valves, and advanced thermal shielding. The Byzantines hadn't just discovered a neat fire trick. They had successfully weaponized liquid plasma through complex fractional distillation centuries before the chemical revolution. The Byzantine emperors knew exactly what they possessed, a weapon capable of ending the world as they knew it. The formula was guarded so ruthlessly that the brilliant chemical engineers who invented it were effectively imprisoned within the deepest vaults of the palace, strictly forbidden from ever communicating with the outside world. The state intentionally compartmentalized the manufacturing process, so no single person knew the entire recipe. Eventually, to prevent global proliferation, the empire deliberately destroyed the formula. They erased their own world-changing scientific breakthrough, ensuring the secret of liquid plasma died with them. But a weapon of mass destruction is completely useless if you cannot aim it. If chemical plasma in the 7th century shatters your historical timeline, wait until you see the microscopic, analog computing system used to calculate the exact firing algorithms of the ancient world at number 2. Story 2. The Antikythera Mechanism. Spring of 1901. A crew of exhausted Greek sponge divers is fighting the treacherous, unpredictable currents off the rocky coast of Antikythera. Deep below them lies a massive, sprawling Roman shipwreck dating back to the 1st century BC. Battling the deadly pressure of the deep, they haul a strange, heavily calcified lump of green bronze to the surface. For decades, it sits quietly in a museum display case, entirely dismissed by curators as a piece of formless junk from a primitive, forgotten era. But in the late 20th century, modern high-resolution gamma-ray tomography finally pierces through 2,000 years of dense corrosion. The resulting 3D scans make the scientific community's collective jaw hit the floor. Hidden inside the corroded rock is a horrifyingly complex arrangement of over 30 perfectly cut, interlocking bronze gears. It is a miniaturized differential gear system. The ancient Greeks had built a functioning analog computer capable of tracking celestial bodies down to the exact hour, predicting eclipses, and calculating complex orbital physics with terrifying precision. Mainstream archaeologists and classical historians immediately went into damage control. Open an encyclopedia today, and they will comfortably label this impossible artifact a harmless astronomical calendar. They desperately want the public to believe that ancient engineers dedicated industrial-level micromanufacturing just so wealthy aristocrats could read their daily horoscopes. They classify it as a peaceful, isolated novelty to keep the linear timeline intact. But military historians and ballistics experts look at this 30-gear differential computer and see something entirely different: the ultimate analog targeting mechanism. If you possess the advanced differential math required to calculate the exact elliptical orbit of the moon and instantly adjust for anomalies in planetary motion, you hold the exact mathematical algorithms required to calculate parabolic arcs, wind resistance, and trajectory variables for long-range torsion artillery. You absolutely do not build a microscopic, analog computer with millimeter tolerances simply to figure out when the next full moon is. You build it to calculate the exact lethal firing solution needed to drop a 100-pound flaming boulder onto the deck of a moving enemy warship from half a mile away. The Greeks possessed the analog computing power of a World War II mechanical bomb site, thousands of years before the invention of the microchip. They didn't just have catapults, they possessed guided ballistics. Yet, the true military application of this device is fiercely denied by academia, maintaining the illusion of a primitive, technologically inferior past. And the sponge divers who dragged this world-changing truth from the abyss, they suffered horrific, agonizing decompression sickness. Several died, paralyzed and completely ignored by the authorities, their brutal sacrifice swept under the rug just like the true purpose of the machine they discovered. But calculating a trajectory for a catapult is child's play compared to what comes next. If an ancient analog computer forces you to rewrite the Bronze Age, wait until you see the apocalyptic weapon that left physical, flash-melted scars on the Earth itself at number 1. Story 1. The Vitrified Citadels. We have tracked a terrifying, undeniable red thread of impossible engineering across thousands of years. From the perfect, mass-produced ballistics of the Wacha to the molecular perfection of carbon nanotubes in the Middle East, we have seen analog targeting computers and hypergolic liquid plasma. But all of these surviving fragments pale in comparison to the apocalyptic physical evidence scattered across the globe, the ultimate proof of ancient, directed thermal weaponry. The dusty, sun-baked streets of Mohenjo-Daro in the Indus Valley and the freezing, windswept peaks of Scotland share a horrific, impossible geological scar. When modern archaeologists and structural engineers dug into these massive, ancient citadels, they did not find collapsed walls or the standard remnants of a Bronze Age siege. They found absolute thermal devastation. Entire sections of solid granite ramparts and terrestrial clay brick foundations have been flash-melted into a solid, impenetrable mass of black glass. Mainstream academics and traditional historians will look you dead in the eye and confidently claim that ancient Celtic tribes or Indus Valley defenders simply piled up timber and set their own walls on fire to magically strengthen the stone. They desperately blame primitive campfires to keep the linear timeline of history intact. But the merciless laws of thermodynamics completely obliterate the official narrative. An open air with fire, even heavily stoked by high winds, burns at an absolute maximum of about 1,472 degrees Fahrenheit, 800 degrees Celsius. However, to melt solid granite and transform terrestrial clay into bubbling liquid black glass requires a sustained, highly concentrated thermal shock of at least 2,700 degrees Fahrenheit, 1,500 degrees Celsius. Physics absolutely forbids a pile of burning twigs from bridging a 1,200-degree thermal deficit in the open air. Heat disperses. It does not magically concentrate to the melting point of bedrock. Furthermore, the epicenter of Mohenjo-Daro, scientists discovered perfectly preserved black glass nodules scattered across the ancient pavement, alongside shocking microscopic deformities in the sand known as shock quartz. You cannot get shock quartz from a kitchen fire. In modern times, you only find a specific directional, instantaneous melting and extreme pressure anomaly at the detonation zero points of multi-megaton nuclear airbursts. To achieve this hyperlocalized vaporization, you need an instantaneous plasma burst. You need a directed thermal weapon. The analog targeting computers, the nanotechnology, the automated artillery, they were all just conventional arsenal. The vitrified citadels represent the horrific climax. Entire civilizations, comprising millions of men, women, and children, were instantly vaporized in a fraction of a second, their existence permanently erased, leaving nothing behind but highly radioactive shadows and melted rock. What they fired wasn't just a release of thermal energy. It was a complete, deliberate reset button on human history. What if human history is not a triumphant, slow climb out of the primitive darkness? What if the story of civilization is actually a desperate, amnesiac recovery from a high-tech, self-inflicted apocalypse? Mainstream history books demand that you believe in a comfortable illusion of slow progress. They want you to blindly accept that melted granite is just a campfire accident, that analog computers were used for reading horoscopes, and that nanotechnology in the Middle Ages was just a lucky strike of a hammer. One could argue these are all isolated flukes of history, exaggerated by time and mistranslation. But the laws of physics do not allow for magical, synchronized coincidences across multiple continents. This isn't just about ancient weapons. This is about how quickly advanced, paradigm-shifting knowledge can be intentionally erased, classified, and buried by those who survived to write the history books. 99% of people will click off this video, accept the official, sanitized narrative, and go back to sleep. But the fact that you watched this far means your brain is wired differently. You demand the hard data. You see the massive, glaring impossibilities that the academic elite are trying to hide. So, I am turning the floor over to you. Are you team coincidence, believing that our ancestors somehow accidentally defied the laws of thermodynamics and molecular physics? Or are you team cover-up, acknowledging that a highly advanced global civilization possessed weapons of mass destruction and was wiped off the map? Drop your absolute best argument in the comments right now and defend your stance. Hit subscribe to officially archive the truth and join the think tank. Let's see who can build the most compelling case. Until next time, keep questioning everything.